For 50 years, he was the most feared assassin alive, governments feared him, and mercenaries avoided him, as he spent his entire life building an empire from the shadows. But then, the people he served decided he was no longer useful. They didn't betray him because he failed or lost. They did it because he got old, and because he got sick. So they put a fortune on his head, and sent the world's deadliest killers after their own legend. It should have been the end, and for a moment, it was. But then, he opened his eyes. The cancer was gone, the wrinkles were gone, his 60-year-old body had completely disappeared, and in its place stood the most dangerous version of himself. Young, healthy, and filled with a level of hatred he'd never felt before. Now, the empire hunting him thinks it's chasing a dying old man. What they don't know is that the man they're looking for no longer exists. The monster that replaced him is coming for everything. One name, one debt, and one body at a time. But none of this started with revenge. It started with a girl walking into a bookstore. At the time, Peter looked about as threatening as a retirement home resident. 60 years old, cancer-ridden, and barely staying alive thanks to a pocket full of medication. After spending 50 years as one of the deadliest killers on Earth, he was finally trying to live quietly until the bookstore door opened. A high school girl walked in asking for study books. Normal customers looked at prices, but Peter looked at people. And something about this girl immediately felt wrong. While she smiled and chatted like an ordinary student, claiming she was a third year at the local high school, Peter was already certain of one thing. She wasn't here to buy books. She was here to kill him. Peter didn't need to see the knife to know it was there. He could smell the cheap perfume she used to mask the scent of cold steel. He'd been smelling blood for 5 decades. A teenage amateur wasn't going to catch him off guard. He casually called her out on her lies, pointing out that the school she claimed to attend didn't even exist 3 years ago. The girl froze, realizing she wasn't hunting a senile old man. She was standing in a cage with a wolf. But Peter was tired. He told her to go home. He recognized her eyes. They had that glorious orphanage look, the same hellhole that spat him out years ago. But the organization doesn't do going home. Suddenly, the ceiling decided to join the conversation. 2 more assassins crashed through the roof, turning the bookstore into a firing range. Peter, despite his body being held together by spite and aspirin, grabbed the girl and shielded her. He wasn't trying to be a hero. He just hated seeing the organization's plan B involve executing their own plan A failure. The physical toll was immediate. A bullet found its mark, and Peter's midsection became a crimson mess. His body, once a finely tuned weapon, was now a rusted-out jalopy. A long-haired punk and a guy with an octopus tattoo on his head stepped out of the smoke, laughing at the state of the legend. The octopus guy was especially chatty. He revealed that the brass wanted Peter gone because a single photo of his face had leaked. The price on his head? 7.6 billion won. Coincidentally, that was the exact amount Peter had in his savings account, a lifetime of blood money that the organization now wanted to refund to themselves. They didn't just want him dead, they wanted to humiliate him. They treated him like a punching bag, mocking his illness and his age. Peter took the hits, his vision blurring, his ribs cracking under the weight of his own obsolescence. But even a dying wolf has one last trick. With a bloody smirk, Peter tossed a parting gift, a flashbang that turned the room into a white void. By the time the assassins stopped seeing stars, the legendary ghost had vanished into the pouring rain. Now, we find him huddled under a plastic slide at a nearby playground, gasping for air that his lungs don't want to hold. He's bleeding out, shivering, and realizing that the end isn't some glorious sacrifice, it's just cold, wet, and lonely. While he lay there, rotting under a plastic slide like discarded trash, his life flashed before his eyes, and it wasn't exactly a highlight reel. While normal kids were learning their ABCs, Peter was learning the exact pressure required to snap a human radius. While teenagers were fumbling through their first dates, he was shivering in a Siberian foxhole, waiting for a target to blink. He gave 50 years of blood and bone to an organization that treated him like a loyalty card. They were ready to shred the moment the rewards got too expensive. The new management didn't want a legend. They wanted a clean slate and a vacant seat. He gripped the wet sand, his heart stuttering. It wasn't just the betrayal that burned, it was the audacity. They didn't just want him dead, they wanted his retirement fund. 7.6 billion won. That wasn't just money, it was every drop of sweat and every nightmare he'd endured for 5 decades. As the darkness started to swallow him whole, his last thought wasn't about peace. It was about the fact that he was way too petty to die while someone else was spending his cash. Cut to a nearby hideout, where 2 low-level bottom feeders were currently patting themselves on the back over a pot of boiling soup. They were busy daydreaming about the Ferraris they'd buy with the legend's bounty, mocking a man they weren't fit to carry a body bag for. They were so busy laughing, they didn't notice the silhouette standing in the doorway. He didn't look like a dying 60-year-old anymore. The man standing there had the frame of a high school athlete and eyes that had seen the heat death of the universe. When the thugs tried to play tough, acting like he was just some lost student, they learned a very painful lesson in biology. Peter didn't even need a gun. He treated the long-haired amateur like a tutorial level, breaking bones with the casual indifference of someone snapping dry pasta. The highlight of the evening? Our guy grabbed a literal squid tentacle from their soup and used it as a flail. You'd think a rubbery piece of seafood wouldn't be lethal, but in the hands of a man who's forgotten more ways to kill than these punks will ever know, it was a high-speed ticket to the ICU. He slammed the loudmouth into the boiling pot, turning their dinner into a crime scene, and walked out with the only thing that mattered: the realization that the Peter they were hunting was officially a ghost. A quick trip to a subway bathroom confirmed the impossible. Looking back from the mirror wasn't a wrinkled prune, but a man in his absolute prime. The bullet wounds? Gone. The stage 4 cancer that was eating his insides evaporated. His body was a temple again, and he was the god currently looking for a new wardrobe. Of course, the universe wasn't done being a nuisance. Two generic punks decided a subway restroom was the perfect place for a smoke break, ignoring the no smoking signs and the general vibe of common decency. They made the mistake of thinking the handsome kid in front of them was an easy target. Peter, ever the fan of traditional Eastern values, decided to give them a crash course in respecting your elders, even if he didn't look like one. He didn't just beat them, he dismantled them. He explained the physics of a folding knife while disarming them, making it clear that if he actually wanted them dead, they would have stopped breathing 3 minutes ago. He walked out of that bathroom sporting a freshly donated suit from the bigger thug, looking like $1,000,000 but feeling like absolute zero. Why? Because he finally checked his bank balance. The screen read zero. Every single one of his $7.6 billion was gone. The glorious orphanage, the massive, cult-like corporation that raised him, had finally cashed out his life's work. They were a global titan now, hiding behind religion and politics, thinking they were untouchable. Peter looked at the empty balance and felt a cold, familiar fire. He'd spent 50 years building that company's thrown out of skulls. Now, he was going to use his new lease on life to burn the whole palace down. While the world was busy looking for a dying old man, the man himself was currently walking into a lion's den with nothing but a pair of chopsticks and a massive chip on his shoulder. But first, let's look at the lion in question. A guy nicknamed Octopus. This dude was the definition of drinking your own Kool-Aid. He was currently busy wiping the floor with a group of mercenaries who thought they could cash in on his territory. Octopus didn't just fight. He moved like a biological glitch, twisting his body into shapes that would make a yoga instructor weep. He was a B-rank specialist in making people's joints go the wrong way, and he was feeling himself. He was convinced that the legendary Peter was just a bedtime story for frightened hitmen. Until they opened the door, and there was Peter. Except he wasn't Peter the geriatric. He was a young man in a sharp suit with the kind of dead inside eyes that only come from 50 years of professional murder. Octopus, being the observant genius he is, didn't recognize his own former mentor. He just saw a kid who'd wandered into the wrong high-stakes execution. Peter didn't waste time with a resume. He sat down, started eating, and casually mentioned that someone owed him $7.6 billion. The room went cold. Octopus stopped laughing and decided that the kid knew way too much. He gave his goons the signal to turn Peter into Swiss cheese. But Peter wasn't interested in a fair fight. Before the first guard could even pull the trigger, Peter flicked a chopstick, a literal piece of wood, and buried it in the guy's throat with the precision of a neurosurgeon. Octopus finally realized he wasn't dealing with a civilian. He pulled his own gun and started unloading, mocking Peter for hiding behind a wooden table like he was in some low-budget action movie. "Tables don't stop bullets, kid," he screamed, watching the wood splinter and blood-red liquid pool on the floor. He walked over to finish the job, expecting to find a corpse. Instead, he found a couple of smashed bottles of chili oil. Our legend hadn't been bleeding. He'd been seasoning the floor. Before Octopus could process the spicy deception, Peter was on the ceiling like a vengeful spider. He spat a mouthful of that same chili oil directly into Octopus's eyes, turning the hitman's vision into a world of pain and capsaicin. In the chaos, Peter didn't just punch him. He dismantled him. Every strike was a lesson in how to turn a human body into a pile of useless meat. Desperate and blind, Octopus fell back on his ultimate technique. He lunged forward, wrapping his limbs around a figure in the dark, squeezing with every ounce of his octopus strength. He started gloating, screaming about how experience beats youth every time. He was convinced he'd finally snuffed out the threat. Then he heard a voice behind him. Nice hug. Too bad it's the wrong guy. Octopus blinked the oil out of his eyes, only to realize he was currently snapping the neck of his own subordinate. Peter was standing 5 feet away, looking bored. The realization hit Octopus harder than any punch. This kid wasn't Peter's student. This kid was Peter. Peter didn't just kill him. He quoted the organization's own training manual back to him. The same manual Peter probably helped write. He reminded the dying hitman that the moment you think you've won is the exact moment your head leaves your shoulders. And then he made it official. By the time the sun came up, the Glory Council, the massive Cultern conglomerate that Peter used to call home, realized they had a problem. For professional assassins were dead, their B-rank star was a pretzel, and the old man they were hunting had seemingly evaporated. The organization decided to get creative. If they couldn't find a ghost, they'd turn the whole world into a search party. They didn't put out a wanted poster. They put out a charity advertisement. Huge billboards started popping up everywhere, featuring Peter's old, wrinkled face, asking the public to help find this lonely grandfather and give him a warm meal. It was a brilliant, sick joke. They even added a toll-free number for people to report sightings of the lonely grandfather. Our guy, currently inhabiting a body that looked more like a K-pop idol than a corpse, stood on the sidewalk and watched a volunteer hand out flyers with his old face on them. He didn't just see a flyer, he saw a declaration of war. He crumpled the paper with a smirk that would have terrified anyone who knew who he actually was. He wasn't going to run. He was going to walk right through their front door and ask for his 7.6 billion won back with interest paid in teeth. But a ghost needs a haunt, and a legend needs a dealer. Peter headed for the city's industrial armpit, finding a derelict public restroom that looked like it hadn't seen bleach since the Cold War. Behind a loose brick, nestled between ads for kidney sales and shady companionship, he triggered a hidden mechanism. A spiral staircase opened up, leading from a literal shithole into a billionaire's fever dream. This was the den of the wolf. The air changed instantly, from the smell of wet trash to the scent of expensive silk and vintage scotch. But the welcome party was less than friendly. A blind woman, moving with the eerie grace of someone who didn't need eyes to map the room, lunged at him. She was Wolf, an information broker who traded her vision for ears that could hear a heart skip a beat from across the hallway. She didn't care about his new, handsome face. She smelled the intruder. She swung her walking stick with lethal intent, a blur of motion that would have decapitated a normal person. Peter didn't fight back. He just danced. He treated her strikes like a rhythm game, dodging by hair's breadth while casually critiquing her expensive wallpaper. The woman was convinced he was a Glory Council hitman until her attack dog, a massive beast named Alexander, decided that instead of mauling Peter, he'd rather roll over for a belly rub. It's hard to maintain a blind assassin persona when your guard dog is treating the intruder like a long-lost best friend. The next 30 minutes were a weird mix of forensic investigation and comedy. Wolf spent the entire time feeling Peter's face, her fingers tracing his jawline like she was trying to figure out if he was a hallucination or a miracle. The old man's smell was gone. The cancer was gone. He was vibrant, firm, and 30 years younger. Peter didn't have time for her fascination. He had a plan. He called it the Eye of the Storm. The Glory Council operated a high school, New Glory High, as a sanitized front for their recruitment. It was a factory that turned orphans into weapons. If you wanted into the council's inner sanctum, you had to graduate from their specialized assassin class. The plan was simple. The greatest hitman in history was going back to high school. To the first day of term, New Glory High was buzzing. Usually, a transfer student is a footnote. But Peter, now going by the alias Kim Sung-gu, walked through the gates and caused a collective system crash among the female student body. He looked like he walked off a movie set, but his eyes had the weight of a man who'd seen too many funerals. He didn't do blending in. While most kids were worried about their grades or who was dating whom, Peter walked onto the stage during the morning assembly. He grabbed the microphone and looked directly into the hidden security cameras he knew were watching. "My name is Kim Sung-gu," he announced to the silent hall. "My hobby? Fighting. My specialty? Fighting. And my career goal? I'm going to be an assassin. In fact, I'm going to be the best one this school has ever seen." The room exploded. The teachers looked like they were having strokes, and the students thought it was a top-tier joke. But behind a glass observation deck at the back of the hall, the real students, the ones with weapons hidden under their blazers, started taking notes. Peter wasn't looking for a seat in the back of the class. He was putting a target on his own chest so big they couldn't miss him. Of course, being a high school heartthrob comes with a side of insecure meathead. A guy named Yu Chun, who had a scar on his lip and the intellectual depth of a puddle, decided Peter was a threat to his alpha status. Apparently, Peter's mere existence was stealing his girlfriend. Yu-chun cornered him, flanked by a squad of goons who looked like they'd been held back 3 years. He was crying, literally leaking tears, about his 20-day anniversary being ruined. The meathead lunged with a punch that he thought was a world ender. Peter didn't even move his feet. He just leaned in, and instead of breaking the kid's jaw, he gave him a high-velocity flick to the forehead. It was the kind of strike that didn't just cause a lump. It probably rearranged the kid's childhood memories. Yu-chun hit the floor, nursing a forehead that was rapidly turning into a unicorn horn, while a panicked, balding teacher dragged Peter off to the office. But the real ghost wasn't the teacher. It was this girl, watching the whole thing with wide, terrified eyes. It was the volunteer from the bookstore, the girl who had watched Peter bleed out just days prior. She looked at this handsome, young Kim Sung-gu and saw the same cold, calculating predator that had dismantled a hit squad with a pair of chopsticks. She was currently hyperventilating over her lunch tray when Peter casually sat down next to her. He wondered aloud if she was preparing for a famine or just eating her feelings, but the reality was much darker. She was vibrating with a specific kind of terror that comes from knowing the kid sitting next to you once used a pair of chopsticks to turn a hit squad into a memory. Back then, at the octopus hideout, Peter had given her a simple choice. Tell the organization, a geriatric legend, did the deed or die right there. Now, she was stuck in a loop of panic, trying to figure out why this biological anomaly was following her to school. She tried to act tough, stuffing her face with food and grumbling about how the organization was breathing down her neck because of him. But Peter didn't buy the act. He'd saved her life, and in the world of professional killers, that's a debt that usually ends in a funeral. He leaned in, his eyes cold and ancient despite his teenage face, and reminded her that they were in the same boat now. Whether she liked it or not, she was his inside man. He even dropped her real name, Lee Yuna, just to let her know that there were no secrets he couldn't dig up. By the time she looked up to protest, he'd vanished, leaving her alone with a tray of cold food and a growing sense of doom. If Peter's goal was to blend in, he was failing spectacularly. During the school's sports festival, he moved like a glitch in the Matrix. A kid named Jonathan, the school's resident track star, thought he was the fastest thing on 2 legs until Peter lapped him while looking like he was out for a casual Sunday stroll. It didn't stop at the track. In health checkups, his vitals were off the charts. In home economics, he handled a kitchen knife with the kind of terrifying fluidity that made the teacher wonder if he was peeling apples or preparing for a surgical strike. But high schools are breeding grounds for small-time tyrants, and New Glory was no exception. Peter stumbled upon a group of punks cornering a middle-aged teacher, mocking his authority, and threatening his job with the casual cruelty of kids who know they're backed by a powerful organization. These little psychos thought they were untouchable because they had connections. Peter watched them for a moment, disgusted. He'd spent 60 years dealing with real monsters, and these kids were just barking puppies who hadn't been kicked hard enough yet. When the lead bully, a kid in a green track jacket, decided to spit on Peter and throw a punch, the world slowed down. Peter didn't just dodge. He moved with the practice ease of a man who'd been avoiding bullets before these kids' parents were born. The bullies tried everything, even a stray brick to the back of the head, but Peter dismantled them with the clinical precision of a board god. He didn't just beat them, he humiliated them until they were begging the teacher for forgiveness. That's when the boring teacher act dropped. The man Peter had saved wasn't some helpless educator. He was a shark in a cheap suit. He watched Peter's movements, noting how the kid hadn't dropped a single drop of coffee from the cup in his hand, despite the brawl. He realized Peter was a predator in a polo shirt. This was the entrance exam Peter had been waiting for. The teacher wasn't just a teacher. He was the head instructor for the council's secret training program. He invited Peter to join the service club, the school's euphemism for its state-of-the-art assassin nursery. Peter walked into the service club headquarters expecting a den of vipers. Instead,